Alrighty, good evening, everybody. So I had to get some stuff finished on the slides there. They're pretty basic tonight, but I just wanted to clean them up a little bit because at one point I had 2 and 3 tweets of all the recommendations that you guys sent on per slide, and then I was like, yeah, that doesn't look that good, so I split them up, and that way we can have a little bit more of an extensive discussion about it and everything like that. So the way that everything is going to work tonight, we are going to go through. We're going to talk about the opening night lineup a little bit. We're going to talk about the lines that were skated in today, and we're going to talk about the line combination recommendations that were sent in by you guys via the comments. I appreciate it. We've got about 16 of them to go through. Some of them are pretty similar, but there's also some people who submitted some ones that were pretty different, and I appreciate them for that because it gives us a lot to talk about, because we know that whatever lineup we see now won't stay the same for a very long time before there's something different in there. So once we get through all those, we're going to take a short break, and then I will show you guys 2 of the line combinations that I drafted up, and I will tell you what I like about them and why I came up with those and how well I think they can work. It's not anything that I necessarily think that Brind'Amour would do. It's just stuff that I think would work that I just wanted to express myself as how I felt about those. So we'll get to some of the comments first, and we'll pull the slides up. Tony D, what's up, buddy? J-Dub, good to see you, pal. Tony D also says mine would have been the same lines as the Canes are already using. Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's a few people who feel that way. Griff's one of them, actually. So we'll go ahead and start pulling up the slides here and everything like that. So first things here, opening night roster. Not anything particularly unexpected this year. There were a lot of question marks going in last season because team wasn't as deep as it is now. You didn't know if Jackson Blake was going to make the jump, even though the necessity for him to potentially do so was there. But he did make the team out of the gate at camp, and he managed to stick around the entire season. Whereas this year, you kind of already knew almost everybody that was going to make the team. The only really big question marks were Nadeau and Legault. And if there had really been room for either one of them, then I think that that's probably a done deal. And if it was anything like last year where there was an opportunity there for them, either one of those guys could have been called up, but that was not a point of concern this season. So forwards, you have Jordan Staal, Sebastian Aho, Logan Stankoven, Seth Jarvis, Nikolai Ehlers, William Carrier, Andrei Svechnikov, Jordan Martinook, Eric Robinson, Jackson Blake, Taylor Hall, Mark Jankowski, and Jesperi Kotkaniemi. And then on the defense, you have Shane Gostisbehere, Jalen Chatfield, Mike Riley, Keandre Miller, Alexander Nikishin, Sean Walker, and Jacob Slavin. Goalies, Frederik Andersen, new arrival Brandon Busey, who is the first person to wear number 30 since Cam Ward, and that lasted for about 5 minutes, and Pyotr Kochekov. Now, the lines that they were using at practice today, you had Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis, Svechnikov, Stankoven, Blake, Martinook, Staal, Carrier, Hall, Jankowski, and Robinson, Kotkaniemi as the healthy extra. He's probably just being held out for precautionary reasons. After that cut that he took up near his eye and everything, I imagine he probably had to get some stitches or sutures or something like that. So not worth really risking reopening that wound until, you have to and everything like that. And KK is a pretty physical player, so you don't want to make that become a possibility until you absolutely have to. So the first submission we had here in regards to the lines is actually Griff. He says, I like the lines they practiced with today. Even though that excludes Kotkaniemi, that'll probably change. I imagine that he'll be in the lineup over Jankowski so long as he's good to go and everything like that. But we'll see how it all turns out and everything like that. All right, so the first submission here we got from Aaron Manning Wrights, longtime mutual, very, very good stuff. If you're not following her, I highly recommend it. Her lines are Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis, Blake, Stankoven, Svechnikov, Hall, Staal, Martinook, Robinson, Robinson, KK/Jankowski, and Carrier. Put second line wingers on their off wings. Put Hall with Staal and Martinook. Marty has played off wing plenty. Build an actual fourth line and trade KK to somebody that needs a 3C. Total possibility right there that Kotkaniemi still gets traded. We have to see how some other stuff works out, though, because we're not entirely confident that Stankoven is going to stick at center just yet. So that's one of the big question marks that the Canes have there, is if Stankoven is going to work out there. Now, that's something that's not going to be determined very quickly. That's going to take about 15 to 20 games, I would say, before you can definitively say yes or no. The good news about that is Rod has already liked what he's seen out of Stankoven at center. When Aho was initially being switched to center, Rod said he didn't like what he saw. Aho ended up sticking. When they tried Necas out at camp there a few years ago, Rod said he didn't like what he saw, and Necas never really stuck there. Stankoven, he's off to a little bit of a better start already than either one of those guys were, based on what Rod is saying and also based on what I have seen. So that's going to be the big thing there. If Stankoven does stick at center, then there's no reason to keep KK. You might as well trade him and reload your draft picks, and maybe that's capital that you can flip at the deadline, everything like that. Everyone knows I'm a big KK fan, but I'm also just kind of worried that he needs a fresh start and that maybe he's just not a good fit here. Second line wingers on their off wings, I like that idea, especially with Svechnikov. That's something that I have talked about extensively with Svechnikov, that he's playing his unnatural position when he's playing the left wing. He should be on the right. We saw that when he was playing with Aho and Teravainen a few years ago, much more effective on the right wing. At times where he's been playing right wing in the past few years, ever since Teravainen left, much more effective over there. Svechnikov on left wing is a square peg in a round hole. It's just not going to work, and he's best utilized that way. If you're wondering part of the reason why he struggled to produce, and I legitimately believe that's part of the reason why. So when I get to my line combinations after the break, I'm going to actually talk about that a lot more. Missouri Mike, who everyone still thinks that I'm him, but we're going to totally dispel that rumor probably sometime on Friday, because him and I are going to be doing a stream together soon. Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis. We know that Ehlers is going to fit into the system, and he will be able to work out with Aho and Jarvis. Will be a way better upgrade than Svech. I assume line 2 will be something like Svech, Kotkaniemi, and Stankoven. Could also see Stan and Jarvis swapping lines from time to time. Okay, so another thing here. Another thing here, I see this interaction here in the chat, and I'm kind of curious about it, but we'll get back to that. Actually, I'm going to hide it right now because it's like going a lot and it's distracting me. Okay. I'll be back to that. I promise. So Ehlers, Aho, and Jarvis has been a safe bet basically since the day Ehlers was signed. I think that was the specific reasoning behind bringing him in, was to be that guy to the left of Aho, because he had Gensel before. Carolina didn't manage to keep him. And then you bring in somebody who in some ways might be a better fit than Gensel was, primarily based on speed and playmaking ability. There are certain things that Nikolai Ehlers does have an edge in that regard when you compare him as a player to Jake Gensel, especially the speed. And if you can find a player that's faster than Seth Jarvis and Sebastian Aho, you found one in Nikolai Ehlers, and someone who complements that line really, really well. He's going to drive possession, particularly going up the left wing. He's good at working to the middle of the ice. He's good at creating time and space for himself and his teammates. So he's going to be a great fit there. And provided you leave Ehlers, Aho, and Jarvis together, I think that line's really going to have some great chemistry. We saw in the preseason when they played together, they looked pretty good. They generated a lot of chances, didn't score a whole lot, but in theory, that will come with time. I know we've seen that before, where the Canes generate a ton of chances and still lose games that they outshot their opponents by 25, 30 shots and outchance them like 5 high danger chances for every 2 or 3 that the other team had. So it's going to take some time for them to get up to speed, but I think that they will adapt relatively quickly, and they're going to be the most important line that the Hurricanes have going forward. So I definitely believe that as well. DMD, Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis. Again, this is that line is looking very likely, and I think it's going to be the best one the Hurricanes have had in a long time. Hall, Stankoven, Svechnikov. I actually really like the idea of maybe doing that for a second line. I would prefer Hall not be in the top 6. That's just me. That's nothing against Taylor Hall. I just feel like that he's a better bottom 6 depth piece, a really good one at that. But this is definitely a more even distribution type of lineup. But you have Hall on the left wing, Stankoven at center, and Svechnikov on the right. I think that line could be very effective. It would just kind of depend on how the trickle-down effect goes through the rest of the other 2 lines from there. Martinook, Stahl, Blake. I've talked about Martinook, Stahl, Blake for a long time about how good I think that line would be. You have guys who eat a ton of puck possession time in the offensive zone with their forecheck. Jackson Blake's puck pursuit was already pretty good when he got to the NHL. That's one of the things that got him drafted, was his ability to pursue pucks, his ability to make those quick little 3-4 foot passes in tight, bait defenders. He's not really big on doing the long passes. He's got great vision. He loves to thread the needle in tight. He could really, really work out well on that line. Carrier, Kotkaniemi, Robinson, that one could be really effective as well. And that gives you like a little bit of a third scoring line, but at the same time, it kind of balances out the bottom 6. It balances out the entire bottom 3 lines there. It gives you one really, really dangerous line, and then how your depth is kind of spread out the rest of the way from there. 37 back at RW and 24 top line with 20 and 27. Leave them alone and let them gel. 53 on the dad line. Sorry, but C37. 82 there until 11 is done. 29 for 71 when he's up for good. Yeah, so that's that's a good lineup there too. I really like that one. I don't know if we'll see that one early on, but the Canes hitting a little bit of a cold streak or having a bad game or something like that, and the line's getting mixed up. It's an inevitability. It's going to happen. It happens to every team, and it's going to happen to this one, even though I think that this team is going to be really, really, really good. So, but I like what you put together there as far as building a team that's deep from top to bottom, but you still have that really, really offensively potent and defensively competent, great 200-foot top line there. So good job on that. Not You says Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis, Blake, Stankoven, Svechnikov, Martin, Stahl, Carrier, Hall, KK, Robinson. So that's essentially about the same thing that Aaron Manning Wright said, I believe. That's close. So Blake, Stankoven, Svechnikov playing their offsides, that could be good. Martin, Stahl, Carrier, proven effectiveness in the line. Hall, KK, Robinson. I know it's listed fourth, but that's definitely more of a third scoring line as opposed to a shutdown line. But between KK and Robinson, you get a lot of speed. Between Hall and Robinson, you get a lot of speed. Between KK and Robinson, you get a lot of physicality. And the three of them can split the defensive responsibility relatively evenly. I think Robinson, most of that would fall on him. KK did pretty solid in the preseason of what we saw him and everything like that. So I think that could be a good. So you'd have three scoring lines and a shutdown line this way. Pretty conventional setup, but I think it could work pretty well. Cavery, what's up, dude? If I'm RBA, I'm throwing Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis, Hall, Stankoven, and Svech. We've seen one lineup like that already. Having Svech on the RW is a huge plus. Also, having 2 6-foot wingers on Stankoven's sides will help. I agree with that. The one thing, though, a lot of people are kind of worried about Stankoven's size. Yeah, he's not the tallest guy, but he's built like a refrigerator. He's built like a fire hydrant. He uses that low center of gravity really well. Not all too dissimilar from Jarvis. So I think that he actually uses the fact that he's a little bit shorter to his advantage, and I also think it motivates him. But it definitely wouldn't hurt to have a couple of guys out there with him that have some size on his line, just because we already know that people are going to target him. We saw it last year in the playoffs a whole lot, so you need something that'll deter that. Having the EAJ line is a must. Yes, I agree. Almost every combination submitted here says the EAJ line is a must, and I absolutely agree with that. So going on to Matthew here, Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis, Hall, Stankoven, Svechnikov, Martin, Stahl, Blake, Robinson, KK, Jankowski. That one's very similar to one of the other ones we had. I really, really like this one. First line is pretty much consistent until we need to make adjustments. And even then, when adjustments need to be made, I feel like that's one of the last things that should be adjusted. Unless that line is just totally laying flat. If they're out there and they're getting chances and the puck's just not going in, leave them alone. Let them keep working it out. Eventually it'll come. So just let them figure it out. They have natural chemistry, it seems, but they are going to need some time to really, really dial themselves in. Second line takes advantage of Svechnikov playing RW where he's best. Hall is also there because Blake is a pure RW. Good point. And for that reason, he plays on the third line just to give it some offensive punch. Makes sense. They possess the puck a whole lot, and you could add that extra offensive effectiveness. That's still that good puck pursuit. Fourth line is just big and responsible. I don't think Brendan Moore will do this, but I appreciate your thoughts. P.S. Carrier sits in the press box. Carrier going to the press box is an inevitability because of how injury prone he is, unfortunately. So me with my lines that I'm going to show you guys after the break, I actually didn't bother putting Carrier in them. I essentially listed him as a 13th forward because that kind of is what he is just because of how much he gets hurt. When he is available, he will play, but his availability is going to be limited. So we'll see. Carrier does have that physical edge and everything to his game, but we'll just kind of have to see how all that goes and everything like that. Slavin as our goat says, just to be different, Hall, Aho, Jarvis. That could be effective. We saw that line a little bit last season. Ehlers, Stankoven, Svech. Ehlers would add some speed to that line in addition to what you're already getting with Stankoven. He definitely could create chances for Stankoven and Svechnikov both, especially with Svechnikov playing on his offside, and you've got a left-handed shot and Ehlers constantly feeding pucks to him in one-timer positions and at the top of the circle and everything like that. And that's 5-on-5 that I'm particularly talking about. That could be really good. Martin, Stahl, and Blake, I hope I get to see a sustained amount of that line. I really do. Robinson, KK, and Carrier. I really like all these lineups you guys are sitting in here because they all make sense. To some degree or another, they all make sense. Daniel Prasley says, Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis would probably be the best line, but I think if things aren't going super well or Rod needs to change things up, Ehlers, Aho, Svechnikov. So that line is actually it. So I drafted 2 lineups, and that's actually the top line in my second one, and I'll go into my rationale about that when I get there. Just only if Jarvis were to be bumped down on Stankoven's line, that's a small line with Blake. I don't want to see that line. Stankoven, Blake, and Jarvis, even though Stankoven and Jarvis, all 3 of those guys play a little bit above their size, but Stankoven and Jarvis especially do. We've seen it for years with Jarvis, and we saw a lot of it with Stankoven, and I think that confidence in his game is only going to grow. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, I wouldn't personally want to see all 3 of those guys on the same line, especially once you get to the playoffs and the war of attrition is really on. That's going to be tough. Glep, this is also one of my other favorite accounts. If you're not following him, I highly recommend it. Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis, Svechnikov, Stankoven, Blake, Martinook, Stahl, Carrier, Hall, KK, and Robinson. Little offensive flair in the bottom 6 while also keeping the top 6 full of top sixers. And that's one of the best parts now, especially if Stankoven works out at center. This team had 3 legitimate top 6 forwards last season. That was Aho, Jarvis, and Svechnikov. Everything else, they were just kind of, making what they could work. And that was a lot of the rationale behind why Rod mixed up the lines he did in a lot of situations, because you couldn't really put that offensive punch on 1 or 2 of the lines that you really, really wanted to. You didn't have a deep enough team to where you could front load the top 6 and then still have a good bottom 6. You kind of had to even things out, especially when you're playing against teams that were really, really good and they could produce a ton of offense and still defend well, i.e. the Panthers. So that's a good lineup right there as well. Canes and Dogs says the line I don't care for is Stahl, Martinook, and Carrier. That line desperately needs somebody that can actually score like Hall or Stankoven when Tulski finds a 2C. Blake, I think, would help that line a lot. Stahl, Martinook, and Carrier, if they're just strictly utilized as a shutdown line and they're not playing as many minutes as they have in the past, I've got no problem with that line sticking around personally, but I definitely see your point on that. I think that there is a little bit of an over-reliance on that line. I do. That's not to say that they're not effective at what they do. They go out there and they shut other teams down. That's their job. But as far as producing, as far as being the biggest net positive that you can get, they're not it. They're not that. So that's where I would want to add someone else to that line, not named Seth Jarvis, because that's one thing I hope I do not see this season is I don't want to see the Stahl, Martinook, and Jarvis line at all. I know eventually we're going to, but I just don't want to see it. Recess Svechnikov on the RW LMAO, and it looks like Rod is going to have him on the left wing again. No idea why he's obsessed with that. I don't understand that one either, buddy. I really don't. I understand that like there's we'll see what happens, but I'm really hoping that Svechnikov finds a way to stay on right wing because he's a significantly more productive player in that regard, and he played that position his entire life until he got to the NHL. Yeah, there's a lot of players who play one position, and for example, there's a lot of guys who are drafted as centers that end up playing wing when they get to the NHL level. But Svechnikov on anything other than right wing is not as effective of a player as he can be. He spent his entire life being an offhanded winger that shoots the puck a lot, forces himself into high danger areas, and either snipes or gets greasy goals off of rebounds, goes to the front of the net, plays the crash and bang style. He'll be a lot more effective and shoot a lot more frequently and get better chances if he's on the right. Raleigh 98, this was the one on YouTube. He says, I like the balance of this. Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis, Hall, Stankoven, Svech, Martinook, Stahl, Blake, E-Rob, KK, and Carrier. Blake has a safe place to learn how to play against top lines with Stahl, and they could have a good synergy, could replace Hall in the dough at some point. I agree. Snowman NC agreed with him, except he said this lineup, I would just flip Blake and Carrier. I honestly wouldn't have a problem with either one of those lineups. See, one of the things here that I've noticed, though, there's pretty much a big consensus, and before we get to Katie's here, because she's got some really good ones, there's a pretty big consensus here that the top line is going to be that top line. And then that Stankoven, for the time being, is going to be your second line center. If he sticks there, you already know that Svechnikov is one of your other top 6 forwards. So in a way, you have the top 6 figured out. 5 of the players that are going to be on those top 2 lines. You just don't know exactly how they're going to line up yet and what's going to work out the best long term. So this team has a lot less problems going into the season this time around than it did last year after all that turnover in the offseason. So we'll see what happens there. So Katie had a really good one here. What I like / want, not necessarily what I think RBA will do, is Ehlers, Aho, Blake, Svechnikov, KK, Jarvis, Martinook, Stahl, Stankoven, Hall, Jankowski, and Robinson. I'm not convinced that Stank is the solution at 2C, and I think that having Aho and Jarvis on separate lines will balance those lines and both on offense and defense. Yes, she makes an excellent point about that as well. Now, when it comes to Aho and Jarvis, they're incredibly effective together 5-on-5. I'm okay with, I would prefer not to, but I'm okay with breaking them up 5-on-5 if you sacrifice a little bit of that line's effectiveness in a way that would make the entire lineup better. As what she's showing here, that's exactly what would happen. So that makes the lines really, really balanced. You have Blake with Aho and Ehlers. Blake can kind of fill the same role as Jarvis, even though he's a little bit slower. Not as good of a player, but he's still pretty good. And he's had all summer to work on stuff, so I'm really excited to see how he does. Svech, KK, Jarvis. Jarvis would probably bring out the best in Kotkaniemi, and we've already seen KK and Svech have some chemistry at times together anyway, so maybe you have something there. Martinook, Stahl, Stankoven. Stankoven, part of the rationale of having him on that line is not all too dissimilar from the rationale of having Blake on that line. And in the event that Stankoven doesn't work out at center, you still have 4 centers. It's not the best situation unless KK really, really finally takes off this year. But at the same time, you're making all that time of possession, all that forechecking, all that offensive zone time that Martinook and Stahl provide you. Adding Stankoven to that makes that a higher net positive, in my opinion. That's going to be that many more times that Martinook and Stahl are getting pucks back in the offensive zone and sending passes to the high slot to the front of the net. And someone with a shot as good as Stankoven, a release as quick and as his is, he's going to make good on all that offensive zone time there. He's going to be the one who finishes on a lot of those situations. So when it comes to Stankoven at center, I'm going to talk about that extensively here in a second. But Katie, those are very good lines, and I thank you for your submission. And the last one here is from Trumpy and Kaniak. My forward lines for the Hurricanes, absolutely beautiful. Jarvis, let me see if I can do this. This is going to be hard. Jarvis, Aho, and Ehlers. Blake, Stankoven, Svechnikov, Martinook, Stahl, Carrier, Robinson, KK, and Hall. Speed, skill, toughness, total package. Maybe the best lineup we've seen. Many such cases, coaching staff should take notes. But I promised him I'd try that. This is actually a friend of mine in real life. So he says, so Blake, Stankoven, Svech, Aaron Manning Wrights talked about that on her lineup as well. You have the second line with 2 offhanded wingers, so you could produce a lot of offense there. Martinook, Stahl, Carrier, proven. Robinson, KK, and Hall. I think that you'd have a really effective scoring line where Robinson pulls a lot of the defensive duties there, as I stated before. Jarvis, Aho, and Ehlers is nearly across the board, and I think that that's the one line we can guarantee that we are going to see. So that is the end of those slides. Let me get over to the comments here. Holy shit, I got a lot to catch up here. Got a lot to catch up on here. Oh, boy. Jesus Christ. Okay, let me rewind this all the way back here. All right. J-Dub says, Carrier works for the Stahl line. No need wasting Blake or Hall or anyone else on that line. It depends on where everything else lines up at and everything. See, here's my somewhat unpopular opinion on Jackson Blake, and this is not a knock on him at all because I'm glad that they signed him long-term. I'm not 100% convinced that Jackson Blake is a top 6 forward. Stankoven, I'm convinced of it. It just remains to be seen if he's going to work out at center. Whether he's a center or a winger, he's a top 6 forward. His ceiling is higher than everybody on the teams right now, possibly even Jarvis. It's going to be some time before we can make that determination, but I'm a legitimate, firm believer that Stankoven can still maybe marginally be a better player than Jarvis, or at least close to the same level. There's definitely not going to be much of a difference between the two when it's all said and done. Blake, on the other hand, I'm not entirely convinced he's a top 9 forward at the bottom and a top 6 forward. I'll say this: bottom 9 forward on the low end, top 6 forward on the high end, specifically a second line guy. I'm not convinced that he's someone that you want to have in your top 6 yet. Now that can change over the course of the year. Some people have talked about how he's slow, but you can do a lot of things to improve your speed. That's one thing that I was going to talk about one day if the Hurricanes had ever acquired McTavish, but as we saw, that didn't happen. He stayed in Anaheim. So that's one thing where I'm just kind of like, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a waste to put him there as long as the rest of the lineup works out fine from there. I think that it's okay to add a little bit of an offensive punch to that line. The biggest reason why is because Stahl and Martinook are not necessarily utilized as a checking line, like in terms of how many minutes they play. That's the problem with it. CEC says, why did my algorithm recommend this? I'm Welsh. There was some Irish guy that got magically dropped in here, and I had a tank top on that day. I actually need to clip that particular part and show it to everybody because it was pretty funny because he was telling me that I looked like, what's his name, that bodybuilder, Eddie something. I don't remember exactly what it was. I'm trying to remember his name. But yeah, it was something like that. It was pretty funny. For some odd reason, we occasionally get you guys from across the pond in here, and you're more than welcome to be in here. I don't care if you've ever watched hockey before or not. We can talk. You know, you might learn one or two things from me, and you'll learn a lot from these guys in the chat here. They're very, very knowledgeable in the game. What's going on in Carolina, my friends? It is where I live. It is 74 degrees outside in October, so I'm very happy. What sport is this? Ice hockey, my friend. Yes, Carolina Hurricanes NHL. Thank you for getting him up to speed. Matthew Brown says, what's your opinion on Doug Wharf resigning as president of the Hurricanes? I want to wait and see what else comes out from that because I saw something, and I'm not taking this serious, and if this ends up being the reason, I'm like, okay. I don't think that this is the actual reason, but it would be kind of weird if it was. Apparently, him and Dundon had creative differences over the new away sweater or something like that. I'm not saying that's true. It's something I saw circulating around online. For all I know, it's a joke. But ultimately, he decided, like, you know, they had a creative difference over the sweater, and Doug Wharf ultimately decided to resign over that. Now, me personally, without any further evidence of that, I don't think that's it. Him resigning 3 days before the season starts, that was almost like a statement resignation, if you ask me. That's not normal. That means that there was probably some sort of very serious internal conflict going on there. And this is just me speculating. I don't know for sure. But, you know, it's like someone resigning from their job, a job like that 3 days before the most important time of year, or we'll say the beginning of the most important time of year for them starts. I don't know. Maybe it had something to do with the arena renovations. Maybe it had something to do with the McLeod and Hart rumors, which I heard some other things about that, but unfortunately I have to keep it to myself. I can't tell you guys what that is. Even though I've heard it from pretty reliable people, but I've been sworn to secrecy on it. And I'm not sure what it is. It definitely was kind of out of nowhere. That's been two things that have been kind of out of nowhere today, because the Connor McDavid contract, that was like, okay, 12 and a half for 2 years. He's basically saying, win the cup this year or get ready to trade me next year. So that's something to keep an eye on, because Carolina would have, in theory, the cap space to go get him. We'll see. That's a long way off. I'm not going to start daydreaming about that because that's a scary thought. There's that. And then there was the Doug Wharf news, which I have a feeling it's, whatever it is, it was a pretty big deal, whatever it was. So I don't know if it has something to do with Tulski's address getting doxxed. I doubt it. Maybe it could. I doubt it was something as trivial as the sweater, because at the end of the day, it's just a sweater. It's not going to dictate whether the team wins or loses or not. It might affect their bottom line a little bit, but even then, a bunch of people, even though I didn't like them, a bunch of people bought them immediately. They were sold out pretty quick. So I doubt that's it. That's funny. J-Dub says something is up with that, Matthew. Yes, I agree. I agree. There's something there. What it is, I don't know. Like I said, I can speculate and come up with ideas all day long, but I'm not going to, just out of the simple fact people might take what I say at face value about it, and I don't know what the hell's going on with that. Eventually, I'm sure it'll come out. At some point or another, one way or another, it'll go out. Now, be careful who you hear it from. As I talked about the night that Tulski got doxxed. Be careful where you hear it from. Because people who are not the most reliable created a media firestorm over the last couple of weeks in Pagnota and Sarah Valley. And they do shit like this all the time, and they don't care who they affect when they do it. That's why I had a problem with it. It was their rhetoric that led to, and I'm not forgiving the person who did what they did, but it was their rhetoric that led to that whole situation, and then nothing came of it. And honestly, I'm getting to the point where, well, I've always kind of been like this. There were two insiders I liked. One of them's retired now, Bob McKenzie and Elliot Friedman. That's it. If I don't hear it from either one of them, or if I don't hear it directly from the Hurricanes organization, like they post something about it themselves, I don't believe it until I see it. Frank Zaravelli could write that the Hurricanes were getting McDavid tomorrow, and I wouldn't believe it, even though he called the Rantanen trade. But it's just, there's some people that have a much higher success rate in those situations, and Elliot Friedman is basically 100%. Anybody else, I don't trust anything they say until there's something concrete about it. I'd have to say one of my other least favorites is Nick Kypreos. I cannot stand Nick Kypreos. When he just magically started saying the NHL should go down to 4-on-4 that one time and then just totally backtracked it and acted like he never said it. Dude, I remember that clear as day, him saying that and me rolling my eyes so hard I could see my prefrontal cortex. Hockey Haggerty says, who is Coco? I think he's referring to Kotkaniemi, I would imagine. He's called him that before. JK, KK, yes. CEC says, are we good? Will we make the playoffs? Yes, the Carolina Hurricanes will make the playoffs. If you want to start following hockey and you decide to take on the Carolina Hurricanes as your team, you're picking a good time to do it because they're going to be good for the next several years. Now, as far as this year being the Cup year, this is something I'm going to talk about when I do the stream on opening night. I'll save the detailed explanation, but what it comes down to is I don't think that this is the year. I think next year is when it happens. I don't think it's this season. I think it's the next one. And I'll go into detail about that as to why, but one trade and my mentality about that could potentially change. J-Dub says, I can't tell. It's weird. He resigned right before Lenovo Center is getting the renovation. That's why I think that maybe it could have something to do with that. That could be it. Still an odd time to resign over that. Because one of the reasons why you don't want to resign right when the season starts, I would imagine anyway, and this is just me kind of speculating again, is you're resigning at a time where a bunch of other people aren't resigning. You know, it's like hockey season ends. There's an exodus of all kinds of positions. Players, GMs, presidents of hockey operations, other types of staff, equipment managers, whatever. That's when everybody they leave jobs and jobs open up, jobs get filled. Revolving door, musical chairs, whatever you want to call it. This is a time of year where nobody's getting fired. Nobody's resigning. Nobody's looking for a job. Everything's already in place. You're trying to play whack-a-mole before you even put the quarters in at that point because all the moles are up above the damn holes. And then all of a sudden, Doug Worf just says, fuck it, I'm out. And he pulls the ejection handle. And I'm like, that was an odd time to do it. So we'll see. J-Dub says, just sub and smash that like, and you can do whatever you like, my dude. Yeah, that sounds good to me. CEC says, the algorithm sent me here for a reason. God wants me to know about the Carolina Hurricanes. Yeah, I'll tell you about all those. We'll tell you all about that. J-Dub. Hockey Haggerty says all those. Tony D says, I'm so confused. I'm going to make the Hurricanes to Wales what Wrexham FC is to America. Oh, that's cool. Hat tricks from Holland. You don't think he should be in the top 6? It's not that I don't think he's capable of it. I just think that he would be better suited to be a depth piece, and that was the primary reason why the Hurricanes went and got him. I think Hall's a great player. He's got a ton of speed still, even though he's on the other side of 30 and everything like that. And, you know, his experience is invaluable. You definitely need him on power play too. He's an emergency penalty killing option. I don't think he sucks by any means. I don't think anybody on this team sucks. I think they're all good. I just think that ideally, if the top 6 is going well and you have Hall in that bottom 6, that's extra punch to the bottom 6 because the top 6 is functioning just fine at that point if you have all the right pieces in there. It's absolutely nothing against him. It's more so me looking at the grand scheme of a lineup as to why I would probably just not want him there. And like I said, nothing against him. Not to say that he can't be effective there. He totally can. It's just when I'm looking at an effective top 6 that doesn't include Taylor Hall, a bottom 6 that does include Taylor Hall is significantly better. So it's just looking at the grand scheme of the lineup. That's not a slight on Taylor Hall at all. Wrexham is 18th on the table. Yeah, I don't know anything about soccer. I'm sorry, football, as they call it. Where are our Carolina boys, J-Dub? Or is it not started yet? Starts Thursday. Okay. This guy's getting in the spirit. I like it. Well, Stankoven's face-off will have to improve significantly. He was fine in the AHL. with the AHL boys, but his faceoff was below 30% with Smashville. Yeah, but see, that's something that's going to come with time because Aho had the same problem, and Aho had the same problem, but he improved over the course of time. Nate just never really made it over the hump with faceoffs, and Aho, I think he hit a career high in him last season at 55.1. Another thing is, and I know that this is kind of an unpopular opinion of mine, I'm not the biggest believer in face-offs being something that's really high on the list of what you need a player to be good at anymore. Not saying that they're not important. I'm not saying that a guy should go out there, and be 45% or something like that. I think if it's closer to 48 in a lot of situations, you're fine. The reason why I say that is if you look back in the day when it was pre-lockout, wood sticks, everyone skated slower, two-line pass, all that type of stuff. If you want to face off, as long as you manage the puck well, you guaranteed yourself about 20, 30 seconds of possession. Whereas nowadays, it doesn't guarantee you anything. Hurricanes lose face-off, and they just forecheck and get the puck back, especially in the offensive zone. They get the puck back in general, but in the offensive zone in particular, they just get the forecheck on and they get it back anyway. It's like losing a faceoff is less consequential to the Hurricanes in the offensive zone than it is a lot of other teams. So is it better to have it? Yes. But as far as like if I'm choosing, list of important things for a center, face-off above 50% is actually pretty low down the list for me nowadays. So CC says, I believe in Stankoven. Buy a sweater. Because he's going to be a household name for that team. I promise. Second line Hall means you can replace him with Nadeau when he's ready, especially if Hall's playing the left wing. Yes, I agree with that. CC says, what city do we play in? I'm where Raleigh, Charlotte, and Greensboro. The team plays in Raleigh now, but it did spend its first season in Greensboro. So, and then there's an ECHL team in Greensboro that I'm still on the fence about supporting, just out of the simple fact I cannot be a fan of the local team where I live, the South Carolina Stingrays, because I'm not going to be the fan of a team affiliated with the Washington Capitals. No, that's not happening. I'd rather get executed personally. Hockey Aggregate says, Carrier not going after Kimmel after that hit on Svetch has changed my mind a little bit about his physicality. Yeah, see, and I didn't get to watch that game that day. I saw the highlight of the hit and Aho going after Kimmel and everything like that. And, it's like Aho, I'm glad he stuck up for Svetch. Aho's not the guy who needs to be doing that, though. Out of the list of people who need to be throwing hands, Aho is pretty far down that list. I'm not saying that he can't fight. You just don't want who is still effectively at this time your best forward getting into a fight, getting hurt, breaking his hand, or, at a minimum, spending 5 minutes in the box, or depending on how everything shakes out penalty-wise, getting a misconduct to go along with it. Aho's too valuable of a player to be that guy, so you don't want that happening in there. Tony just says Blake should only be with Marty and Stahl if Nadeau makes the second line, in my opinion. Yeah, and Nadeau is, him getting called up whenever that happens. It depends on who is injured in the event that you call him up, or if you trade somebody, whatever happens. Nadeau is built to be a top six winger that shoots the puck a lot. If you put him down in the bottom six, especially with as much as he's been marinating in the American League, it just wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to have him anywhere other than the top six. So that's what I want to see. CC says, who are our opponents that we hate the most? First and foremost, the New Jersey Devils. They're basically Hitler to us. That being said, some of my best friends in the whole world are Devils fans, but they're like, we're the allies and they're the Axis. We hate them. The Boston Bruins, we can't like them. The Florida Panthers, we also hate them. Let's see who else. Who else is worth hating nowadays? Dallas Stars, particularly because of a guy named Mikko Rantanen. That's who you need to hate the most. Any team that has the word New York or Buffalo in it, hate all of them. Boston, hate them. Washington, you should hate them. And once you're done hating all them, circle back and continue hating New Jersey, because that New Jersey and Carolina is a legitimate rivalry, and people just don't want to recognize it for some reason. That's one of the best rivalries in hockey. Y'all putting a lot of faith in Stankoven. I hope he doesn't end up in y'all shit list like others do. I have faith in him, but like I said before, I'm not totally sold on him being at center. That's something I'm going to reserve judgment on for about 15 to 20 games. So we'll see. I do my best. Come on, Jarvis can score anywhere. The only problem with that is, though, like when he played with Stahl and Martinook, I think he only had 4 goals out of all the minutes he played with them last year. It was something like that. It was a low number. I don't remember off the top of my head. I just remember it wasn't very high. I am on the Wikipedia. Rod Brindamore will surely lead us to a second Stanley Cup. You're off to a good start there by spelling his name correctly, because I can't tell you the number of times that people have spelled it, like, really butchered it. So good job there. Even if you copied and pasted it, you made sure it was spelled correctly in good faith before you hit enter. So you're off to a good start. Katie is always on point. Yes, she is. Can we just say that Marchand was like killer on that third line with Florida? Yeah. Who was that line? It was Luostarinen and Lundell and Marchand. That was their best line in the playoffs by far. How was that rabbit hole you went through? I guess he's talking to CEC, the new huge Caniac. Are you kidding? No way Stankoven is better than Blake. Stankoven is significantly better than Blake, and I mean that with all the respect in the world, Jackson Blake. Stankoven has the, albeit not a great possibility, Stankoven has the potential to be just as good, if not a little bit better than Jarvis. That's how good of a player I think he is. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to stick at the center ice position, but that kid's good. And like I said, I like Blake. I'm just not sold on him being a top six forward. Stankoven is a top six forward. It's just a question of where he lands in that regard. Stankoven is not better than Blake. I'm dying over here. You and I are just gonna disagree on that. I think Stankoven is better than Blake. Stankoven is a better sniper and even more defensively sound. Well, you're too funny, Tony D. Ain't no way. 74 degrees means nothing to me. I'm enjoying. I'm talking about the temperature. Catherine says, I don't want RBA to turn Aho's line into Stall 2.0 where the priority is defense rather than offense. Yeah, that they can still defend well. Just any line that you have Aho on is going to defend well because of how good of a 200-foot center he is. As far as like pure, honest to God, 200-foot centers, there's only one guy definitively ahead of him. Like as far as pure on both sides of the puck. And that's Sasha Barkov. That's it. And, I hope he's doing well after his injury and everything like that. But as far as like a complete player, someone who does a little bit of everything and does 50-50 on both sides of the puck, Aho is one of the best two-way centers in the league. So any line that you have him on by default is going to be good defensively. And he makes the players around him better defensively. He drives a lot of the possession, primarily through his defense, how quickly he can back check, stick, lift somebody, get a, poke check them, whatever, get possession of the puck, turn around and go the other way. Yeah, Haggerty, we're not going to agree on that one, buddy. I'm sorry, but Stankoven is much better of a player than Blake, in my opinion. Also, for much of this, I didn't realize we were asking questions of the YouTube man. I thought Matthew Brown wanted my opinion on Doug Wharf. Yeah, I saw that, and I just kind of let y'all have that conversation. Stank and Jank says, if Stank doesn't work at 2C, it needs to be Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis, Fetch, KK, Stank, Blaker to the third line with Jordo, Robo, Jank, Hall, Carrier. Yeah, that could work. Yeah, I could see that. Evan Smith says, no way it was over jerseys. Yeah, when I saw that, I was like, that's got to be a joke. There's no way that that's actually what it was over, because like resigning at a time where, there's not really any other openings anywhere around the league, it was something much, much bigger than that. And that's why I would wager to say the building renovations were not the primary catalyst of that, if a catalyst of it at all. Whatever that was, it was a big deal. And I'm curious to see what comes out. But at the same time, I also trying to think of how to say this. So I got to be careful because, like I said, I don't want to divulge some information that I have. I almost don't want anything to come out, whatever it was, because this franchise has dealt with enough controversy and bullshit as it is. Couldn't be happy for 5 minutes after getting Mikko Rantanen because people were already talking about how he wasn't going to sign. And then by the time it looked like, when Carolina put an offer down for him, he didn't sign it immediately, ultimately ended up getting traded to Dallas. And then, let us be happy for 5 minutes about something. Like last season, it was, this offseason, your window is closed. This team is done. That turned out being untrue because everybody outside knew otherwise. Then the Mikko Rantanen thing, and then you get to the off season, and then now you have this whole situation with the Hockey Canada thing. Can we just relax for 5 minutes and just kind of take a deep breath and enjoy things before there's some other controversy? If you really go all the way back when things were turning around for this team and everything was looking good. And then all the stuff about Bill Peters came out well after he had left the Hurricanes. So there's that to consider. And I just kind of wish it would just stop. I really do. In what way is Stankoven better than Blake? Need some numbers to back that up. Tony D, sorry, I'm an analyst. Who do you work for? Like, no, I'm not trying to be a dick or anything. I'm just curious about who you work for and everything like that. Because if you have an argument to me to prove that Blake is better than Stankoven, I'm more than willing to hear it. I just want to know. Defense can't be tracked by a stat, but even during the playoffs, Stankoven had more meaningful goals than Blake. Blake's only meaningful goal in the playoffs was Game 3 versus New Jersey. That's just off the top of my head. Game 5. Never trust David Pagnotta that too. Yeah, defense can be measured by stats, but at the same time, it's never 100% accurate with it because, and I've talked about this before, defense will never be okay. So offense, you can reflect that with numbers almost to a T. Possession, you can reflect that with numbers almost to a T. But, it's like if someone leaves their feet and prevents a shot opportunity and it goes over the net, or if they prevent a clean shot opportunity, I should say, person shoots the puck, goes over the net because they left their feet on time. Well, their Corsi against went up went down and went up, and the other player's Corsi for went up. And statistically speaking, in that particular moment in time, the player who shot the puck was better than the other one. That's one of the reasons why it's just hard to buy and everything like that. And then not to mention there's different interpretations of what, the amount of quality of a chance. Like one person might say something is 0.3 XGA. Someone else might say it's 0.5, depending on which model you look at and everything like that. Because if you go between Money Puck and Natural Stat Trick, which are the two I use the most, you'll notice that there's a little bit of difference in calculation. Maybe that's from them rounding it up and everything like that, but defense is just a hard thing to quantify when it comes to numbers. Oh God. Here we go. I love this final roster. All the lines go well together. Everyone except for Sean Walker should contribute accordingly this year. Well, that Sean Walker guy is going to be Jacob Slavin's new partner. Tony D says defense can be tracked by stats, but it's more better to use the eye touch and watch players. I'm not saying Blake is a bad player, but Stankoven is a better all-around player right now. Kyprios is the one that set off Nature's brouhaha this summer. So annoying. Yeah, that's Nick Kyprios is one of my least favorite people in hockey media by far. Yeah, I use Money Puck all the time. Yeah, I'll just stay out of this little argument you guys are having in there. I'm not interested in that. Yeah, I like both players too. It's just I think Stankoven is a better player. I really do, like a lot. So, all right, I'm going to take a break here. We will be back in about, let's see, it's 8:26. We'll be back in about 10 minutes, and I'll show you guys my line combinations, and we will go from there. Alrighty. Okay, so I am back now. I just needed to grab me one of these because I'm thirsty. See if there were any additional comments here, and this will be the last part of the show. The British Canadian NASCAR fan says, "Hey, warning take, it's the guy that chirped you about your shot. Hey, buddy, how you doing?" I'm gonna on NASCAR 25 though. I'm gonna right hook you into the wall in turn 4 for saying that though. You got a couple more months until I'm just gonna overdrive the corner. I'm just gonna totally send it in there, not lifting. I'm just gonna hit you in the right rear, turn you, and I'm gonna totally destroy your car on lap 1. I'm not even gonna wait until the end. CEC says, I'm leaving, but my heart will remain with the Hurricanes forever. Thank you, my friend. It has been fun having you. Okay. So let's see what we got here. All right. So the combinations that I drafted up here, they're a little bit unconventional, maybe compared to some of the other ones we've seen, because the other ones have been pretty spot on. There's some similarities, there's some not. Initially, I was going to do like 5 or 6 different ones. I've got some handwritten notes here on each of these, and I'm just going to talk about these in particular. It's not so much to talk about these whole line combinations in the grand scheme of things, but more so for me to talk about the effectiveness of each individual line with each of those, which I thought about doing something more extensive, but we're really close to the season starting, and a lot of these questions are going to be answered soon anyway. So this is just going to wrap up the show here and everything like that, and then I'll announce some of the stuff that we have coming up going forward and everything like that. All right. So everyone's favorite top line, Nikolai Ehlers, Sebastian Aho, Seth Jarvis. We have talked about that extensively. Not really much else that needs to be said about that. That's one line that I hope is not broken up, but I'm accounting for that in configuration 2 as a possibility. Jackson Blake, Logan Stankov, and Andrei Svechnikov. You have Svechnikov there to be the guy who's the finisher on the left wing. Stankov to be the center. Jackson Blake playing his offside as well. He's got to get enough shot and get enough puck pursuit to where he can be effective on either side of the ice and allow Svechnikov to stay on the right and use his shot. That line also has some size and physicality with Svechnikov to where, you know, those other two guys can have someone who can help them out in the event that, you know, they get into a David versus Goliath type of situation. For the third scoring line, I have Taylor Hall, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and Eric Robinson. We've seen that line work together pretty effectively in the past. And then Jordan Martinook, Jordan Staal, and William Carrier. This accounts for Carrier being in the lineup. This particular one does, since he is on the opening night roster. I just went ahead and put him in there. And then for configuration 2, or let me go back to the fourth line on configuration 1 for a second. Jordan Staal, Jordan Martinook, William Carrier, you know what you're getting out of them. The reason I have these listed the way that they're listed, this is what I hope the minutes look like 5-on-5 as far as who's pulling the most and who's pulling the least. Jordan Staal, Jordan Martinook, William Carrier, known quantity. You know what they can do. They're not going to provide you a ton of offense, but what you do want them to do is to be out there in those game critical situations when the Hurricanes already have the lead. Now, when you look at how the other 3 lines would be utilized, that's ones you're utilizing in close games or games where you're only up by 1 or something like that, where maybe you need to make some insurance for yourself and score a couple more goals. That's when you would maybe want them out there. Now, then you go back to that fourth line. If you're talking about you're in the last couple of minutes and you want to get them out there, and then you can put Aho's line out there as a secondary shutdown line and stuff like that. And we've seen that done in the past where guys like that are utilized in the last minute of play. We've seen Svechnikov because of how good he is at getting empty net goals. I know that kind of sounds like a meme, but it is an effective part of his game where they put him out there at the last minute and everything like that. So that third line there, though, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, Taylor Hall, and Eric Robinson, I really like the effectiveness of that line when I saw it last season. You've got a decent amount of size between all 3 of them. You've got a decent amount of speed between all 3 of them. You've got a decent amount of physicality between all 3 of them. If Jesperi Kotkaniemi in particular can rediscover his offensive game, and I think Taylor Hall can really bring out the best in him, and Eric Robinson's a much better player than a lot of people give him credit for. Then you go to configuration 2. So I wanted to account for one where Logan Stankoven does not work out at center and where Mark Jankowski is in the lineup. So for this one, you have Nikolai Ehlers, Sebastian Aho, and Andrei Svechnikov. I'm a firm believer that Aho and Svechnikov don't have a ton of chemistry when Svechnikov is on the left wing. If he's playing on the right, you have a left-handed center and a left-handed winger constantly feeding him pucks, so he can be the guy who's generating a lot of those shots, not necessarily always the one who's scoring, but he's generating those shots, creating juicy rebounds for two really quick guys who will go to the front of the net with Ehlers and Aho to be able to finish on those opportunities or dish the next short pass to create another shot. And they've got the speed to go in there and go back and get the puck back when it goes in the corner. And two of those three guys are really, really good defensively. And on the back check, Svechnikov has improved defensively over the course of his time in Carolina. But when you're talking about effective defensive players on that line, Sebastian Aho is number one and Nikolai Ehlers is a close second. And in some ways, maybe he's a little bit better. Ehlers is going to be the guy who's driving a lot of the 200-foot play, because on the forecheck, he's really fast. He's going to be the F1 in a lot of cases getting into the zone, and he's going to be the first guy getting back in a lot of cases when Aho gets caught deep down in the zone. So that way you have those two guys who are both playmakers, both really good defensively, that will open up Andrei Svechnikov's game. You go to the second line. This is a scenario in which Logan Stankoven does not work out at center. You have him on the left wing, Jesperi Kotkaniemi at center, Seth Jarvis on the right. You could maybe swap Stankoven and Seth Jarvis, but that having Kotkaniemi there at the center gives them a little bit more size on that line, because those guys are both a little bit on the smaller side, even though you have one big guy and then you have two guys who play above their size. Seth Jarvis and Logan Stankoven would be the ones doing the vast majority of the finishing on that line. Kotkaniemi would be doing the playmaking and a lot of the forechecking. For as much shit as people give Kotkaniemi on the defensive side of his game, in the offensive zone, his forechecking and everything like that's not really bad, especially since it appears at a glance, and as I've elaborated in the past, that his skating did improve over the summer. Maybe he worked on it. Maybe he had an injury that he was dealing with that's not bothering him anymore. There's a multitude of options. Then for third line, this is the only thing that stayed the same: Jordan Staal, Jordan Martinook, and William Carrier. And then for a fourth line, you have a fourth line with a scoring touch. You could swap them with the line above them, whatever order you want to put it in. Taylor Hall, Mark Jankowski, and Eric Robinson. In this configuration, I would want the Staal, Martinook, and Carrier line to take on a few more minutes than they would in configuration one. So that's just two that I kind of threw together that I wanted to talk about. But looking at it from an individual effectiveness, if I could list in order how effective I think each line would be. The most effective line, I think, here would be Aho, Ehlers, and Jarvis, for one. The second most effective line, I think, would be Aho, Ehlers, and Svechnikov. The third most effective line would be Stankoven, Svechnikov, and Blake. The fourth most effective line, I would say, is Jesperi Kotkaniemi, Eric Robinson, and Taylor Hall. And then the rest of them are kind of tied for fifth in terms of how effective those lines would be. So that's all I've got for tonight. I have to be up at 4:30 in the morning, so I am going to get ready for bed. Thank you guys very much for joining me. Now, some things we have coming up here. I've got this written down here. Tomorrow night, me and my good friend Devil's Joint, we are going to be doing a 48-hour countdown to hockey. We're not going to be live streaming for 48 hours. That's not happening. But we're going to talk. Him and I are really good friends. We're going to talk about this rivalry the Hurricanes have. We're going to preview the season series in particular between the Hurricanes and the Devils. And we're going to have a whole lot of fun just talking about some of the great moments that these teams have had against the past. The Hurricanes have most of the good ones, though. So we're going to talk about that, talk about the expectations for each of our teams, talk about our rivalry, and we're going to talk a lot about our dogs. He's got a really cute little dog himself, and then there's my big dog over there laying on my beanbag until I kick him out of it so I can take it back here in a couple of minutes. And, stuff like that. It's going to be a really good time. On Wednesday, me and AB will be streaming over on Caniac Sessions. We haven't got to do anything over there in a while. We're going to talk a little bit about do a little bit of a season preview and some other stuff. Thursday, there will be a special Landfall Hour where I talk about my personal projections for the upcoming season. There's a lot of them, including a couple in regards to the Olympics. And then I'll do Damage Report on Thursday night after the game. And then it'll be business as usual from there, doing Landfall Hour and Damage Report as much as possible for each individual game. Again, everybody, thank you for joining me. I hope you had fun. I will see you soon.